Mexican authorities reported the explosion of a Pemex pipeline in the state of Puebla. In Argentina, Foreign Minister Santiago Cafiero denounced U.S. role in the campaign of judicial persecution against Vice-President Cristina Fernández. In the UK, postal workers joined the union strikes demanding better salary conditions in line with inflation. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. We do so in Mexico. A strong explosion caused by the drilling of a gas pipeline was recorded in the state of Puebla. The event occurred while personnel of the state oil company were working in the area when their machinery managed to perforate the pipeline, causing a strong explosion that damaged several houses around it. According to civil protection reports, there were no injuries or human losses. Security forces and rescue teams arrived at the site, who requested the evacuation of 200 meters around the area to carry out activities and to start the fire extinguishing works. Undersecretary for Human Rights of the Mexican Ministry of Interior, Alejandro Encinas, said Friday that the so-called historical truth was conceived under the government of former President Enrique Peña Nieto. In a new review of the report on the progress of the case of the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa, Encinas explained that various officials participated in meetings headed by the federal executive at that time to operate the official version of the forced disappearance of the students. The official pointed out that in many cases there are presumptions of alteration of the crime scene, of having created a truth based on acts of torture, and that the design of the so-called historical truth was carried out by the government of former President Enrique Peña Nieto.
We have made an analysis of the way, place, and circumstances of the intervention of different actors, and we have been able to determine how the criminal group Guerreros Unidos articulated with government authorities the disappearance of the students. We have established at all times that the authorities followed the students' movements, who were monitored from days before the mobilization that were going to take place on October the 2nd in Mexico City, and how they were aware of their departure from the teacher school, their arrival in Iguala, and the fact of the persecution and violence that preceded their disappearance, which evidently establishes not only the responsibility for the action and negligence, but the involvement of authorities and state agents in the disappearance of the students.
Presidential candidate Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva met with the candidate for governor of Rio de Janeiro, Marcelo Freixo, where the government plan for the state was presented. Among the proposals presented by Freixo is the creation of employment through the naval and oil industries, in addition to investment in urban transportation and structuring works in communities. For his part, presidential candidate Lula da Silva pointed out that it is necessary to expand the state's abilities to meet the community's security needs.
The news says that there are many bandits, that there is a lot of war in the favelas, when the truth is that all these wars are not due to the lack of police or police excesses. These wars happen because there is no state present fulfilling its social functions.
Likewise, Rio de Janeiro gubernatorial candidate Marcelo Freixo pointed out the importance of the state attending to communities in las favelas.
Important projects such as the Prosperity Neighborhood, where sports and assistance are integrated with policies for women that reach all the families in places of violence, where the police are on one side and the state is on the other, taking care of all lives and leaving no one behind.
On Thursday, across Brazil, people gathered together to watch former President Lula's first interview on the most popular national news program in over a decade. From Recife, our correspondent Brian Meir has more.
There's an old saying in Brazil that goes, if it didn't appear on Global TV Network's Jornal Nacional program, it didn't happen. Last night, Global TV, which was created through grants from Brazil's sub-fascist military dictatorship and has been historically antagonistic towards the left, gave Lula his first interview in over a decade. Across the country, TV screens were set up for outdoor watch parties.
You can conduct serious investigations like they did in Korea with Samsung, in France with Alstom, and with Volkswagen in Germany. You investigate. If the businessman embezzled, you arrest and convict him, but you let the company keep operating. Here in Brazil, Operation Car Wash destroyed the engineering industry that took nearly a century to build.
By coherently and systematically responding to a series of at times hostile questions, Lula da Silva showed Brazil why he's leading by double digits in the presidential race, and why a conservative TV network like Globo would want to silence him for so long.
After 16 years without an opportunity to speak to the Brazilian people on Jornal Nacional, where he was systematically and unjustly accused of crimes and did a lot of damage, not just to Lula, but to the Brazilian people who deserve to know the truth.
Brian Mir, teleSUR, Recife.
Argentina's Foreign Minister Santiago Cafiero denounced the role of the United States in the judicial persecution against Vice-President Cristina Fernández, in view of the recent interference statements made by U.S. Senator Ted Cruz about Vice President of the Republic. The head of Argentina's diplomacy expressed on his Twitter account that these actions show that the process against former President Fernandez is a judicial persecution driven by ideological interests born outside of Argentina. The campaign against the also senatorial candidate aims at her permanent political disqualification, plus 12 years of imprisonment for alleged corruption crimes for which there are no evidence. Social organizations and political parties from different regions of Argentina continue to mobilize in support of Vice President Cristina Fernández in the midst of the political, media and judicial persecution against her. Since the pronouncement of the prosecutor Diego Luciani, in which he requested a sentence of 12 years in prison against the Vice President, people from these and other locations continue to arrive at Fernandez's home in the capital city's Recoleta neighborhood to show their support. Likewise, demonstrations are taking place in cities such as Córdoba, La Plata, Corrientes, and Rosario to denounce the attempts to proscribe Fernández the Kirchner. This Thursday, different political parties call on their followers all over the country to remain mobilized and all alert to defend democracy and the conquered rights. We're going to take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. The former paramilitary leader Salvador Mancuso apologized this Friday to the victims of the armed conflict in the department of Atlántico, Colombia. The former leader of the now defunct United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, who is being held in a U.S. prison, acknowledged his responsibility in the tragedies suffered by the victims and their families during the armed conflict. Mancuso gave these statements in a virtual format to some 400 people in a sports center in the city of Barranquilla in an act of acknowledgement of responsibility and public request for forgiveness. During the event, former commanders of the self-defense group, Edgar Fierro and Jose Mangones, also made their statements. In Colombia, the labor federations, unions, and the national government have reached a first agreement to achieve a labor reform which might be ready by the end of this year. According to Labor Minister Gloria Inés Ramírez, the process of drafting the reform will begin in a few weeks, and it will involve employers, workers, labor unions, some international labor organizations, the Labor Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice, and other international organizations. Rural employment and gender issues will be prioritized in the new reform. Colombia's new defense minister, Iván Velázquez, banned the military from carrying out bombing campaigns against irregular armed groups. Velázquez criticized operations that put civilians, and especially children, at risk. Our correspondent Viviana Bello with the details.
Velázquez said President Gustavo Petro's administration wants to avoid the deaths of civilians and minors who have been forced to join irregular groups.
Children forcibly recruited by illegal groups are victims of violence, are victims of this violence that we have led for so many decades. Therefore, no military action with respect to illegal armed organizations can endanger the lives of these victims of violence. This is the reason for the statement I made at the breakfast we had. We have to privilege life over death, and we cannot carry out operations that endanger the lives of the civilian population.
Velázquez said that this decision is also a sign of the Petro administration's willingness to engage in peace talks with armed groups. It marks a change in the strategy of the Colombian state against guerrilla and drug trafficking gangs.
Bombings must be suspended. We're going to evaluate the specific moment in which a definite guideline can be established, but that is the direction we want to take.
In 2019, the defense minister Guillermo Botero resigned after a military attack against a FARC group, which left 8 children between the ages of 12 and 17 dead. President Gustavo Petro, who was elected in June this year, is trying to change tactics used by the Colombian military. He is pursuing a total peace policy to end the conflict by offering irregular armed groups some legal benefits, such as reduced sentences. From Bogotá, Viviana Bello, TeleSUR, Colombia.
By informal miners in the Madre de Dios department in the southeast part of the country. The protest began after a military police raid in which boats and gold mining equipment were destroyed. In retaliation, demonstrators tried to take over a police station. That's when police opened fire, and that's when the 2 fatalities occurred. Later, demonstrators blocked sections of the interoceanic highway, which runs from the Peruvian coast to the Brazilian border. Protesters also burned down a police guard post. In the United Kingdom, postal workers joined the union strikes to demand better salary conditions. More than 100,000 workers of the British postal company Royal Mail go on strike on Friday to demand wage increases in line with inflation. Union movements of communication workers said that the purpose of the strike is to demand a decent salary increase. The strike was approved at the beginning of August with 97.6% of the votes of the union members and will be followed by strikes called for August 31st and September 8th and 9th. During this summer, other sectors of the country have progressively joined the strikes and mobilizations. teleSUR English will dedicate its coverage of the Football World Cup Qatar 2022 to the figure of Diego Armando Maradona, who accompanied our crew in the last 2 World Cups. With the football star, we also tour our continent with the show De Zurda Viajero. We want this tribute to have its own music. With that in mind, we invite you to write and compose a song for teleSUR's coverage of Qatar 2022 Football World Cup. It must be an original song, never recorded before or published in any media, and free of legal attachments. Record the song in any format, WAV, MP3, even with your cell phone, and send it as an attachment to comunicaciones@telesurtv.net with the following information: author's name, nationality, and name of the song. The closing date of the call for entries is September 10th, 2022. A jury of prestigious musicians and composers from the region will select the winning piece. The prize will be the recording of the song, a video clip, and the wide diffusion of the work. 1 week after the closing of the call, teleSUR will announce the results. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Ukraine's largest nuclear power plant was disconnected from the nation's power grid for the first time in its history. Russian Defense Ministry said that Ukrainian armed forces continue to shell the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the city of Enerhodar, where the plant is located. The ministry also said that the continuous shelling of the critical infrastructure of the nuclear power plant damaged 3 of the 4 high-voltage lines connecting the nuclear facility to the national grid and undermined its safety, which could lead to a major nuclear disaster. Russia continues to accuse Ukraine of targeting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant on Friday. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said the plant was shelled twice by the Ukrainian military over the past day.
Over the past day, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was subjected to shelling from the Ukrainian military's large-caliber artillery pieces twice. As a result of the strikes, 4 ordnance exploded in the area of the oxygen-nitrogen generator and another one in the area of Special Block Number 1. The Ukrainian Air Force artillery position from which the territory of the nuclear plant was being shelled was located west of Marganets in the Dnipro region. As a result of a direct hit by a Russian high-precision ordnance, a US-made M777 howitzer was destroyed at that position.
And Latvia dismantles a 79-meter-tall World War II memorial in Riga, the capital city. A concrete obelisk topped with Soviet stars that was the centerpiece of a monument honoring the Red Army's victory over Nazi Germany was toppled in Latvia's capital. The latest in a series of Soviet monuments demolished following Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. The monument had lately become a rallying point for the Kremlin supporters in Latvia. The demolition occurred amid calls from the Baltic states' ethnic Russian minority to leave it standing. One of the observer missions overlooking Angola's electoral process congratulated voters for their peaceful and orderly participation. Angola's João Lourenço was said to remain president Thursday as his party maintained his lead in the country's most hotly contested election in its democratic history. With more than 97% of the ballots tallied, results published by the country's Electoral Commission gave the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola 51.07% of the votes. The main opposition group, the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, led by Adalberto Costa Jr., stood at 44.05%. The leader of the winning party automatically ascends to the presidency in the oil-rich former Portuguese colony. Supporters of the Just Stop Oil environmental activist movement damaged petrol pumps in London with hammers and glued themselves to the ground to protest against new oil and gas licenses being issued in the United Kingdom.
Terrified about the climate and ecological emergency. I have my future ahead of me and I don't know what that future is going to be like.
I am desperately worried about the climate crisis and the lack of urgent action, but particularly I am really worried about the new gas and oil licenses that are going to get consent in October.
We need an emergency response from the government. We will stop doing these actions once we have a statement from the government that's meaningful.
On Friday, Pakistan's government declared an emergency state due to monsoon flooding it said had affected more than 30 million people. The National Disaster Management Authority said that more than 900 people had been killed this year, including 34 in the last 24 hours, as a result of the monsoon rains that began in June. Officials say this year's floods are comparable to 2010, the worst on record, when over 2,000 people died and nearly a fifth of the country was underwater. The annual monsoon is essential for the irrigating crops and replenishing lakes and dams across the Indian subcontinent, but each year it also brings a wave of destruction. A statement from Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's office said 33 million people had been badly affected by the flooding, while the country's disaster agency said nearly 220,000 homes were destroyed and 500,000 badly damaged. teleSUR English continues to grow. Its signal now reaches Europe. You can order it from your cable dealer or tune it yourself. These parameters that you see on screen are in place since July 1st, and quite soon further changes will be implemented for the signals in the Middle East and Africa. Now more than ever, the world connects to us and our stories are heard in other faraway nations. This news multi-platform will continue providing truthful content to oppose the hegemonic media's narrative and unfaithfulness to our audience. We have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. And now you can also follow us on TikTok account at teleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and much more. For teleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.